glad you could be with me today, all those thousands and thousands of people that watch me rant and rave each day. This is, I think, the third day in a row I think I've done a live feed. I'm doing live feeds because they're easier to edit. I can sort of say what I want to say, but not worry too much about whether it's politically correct or not, which, incidentally, brings me to our topic today, which is about being politically correct. It's about how we use language and the sense of wokeness that fits around the type of language that we use. Now, I've been intrigued by this notion of wokeness for quite some time because it always appears to me that if the left decide that something is unhelpful, hurtful or harmful to somebody else and they want the language changed around that, then that is about being woke. Now, woke also indicates to me that it's different from being asleep. So those people that agree with wokeness, I often think of people who are snoozing, taking it easy, relaxing, not necessarily caring about other people because they aren't woke. And so what has happened, though, is that Andrew Bolt wrote an article in The Advertiser here in Adelaide, incidentally. Do have to remind people I'm in Adelaide, South Australia. If you don't know where that is, look it up on the map. But he talked about how he's kind of offended by wokeness, and he's come out against Stanford University, who have got a dictionary out on language that we should or should not use, and he's being a little bit critical of it. And I just wanted to go through some of those things that he talks about. I'd like to know what you think about this notion of wokeness. I hate the term personally. I think it's about awareness. It's basically endeavouring to create a process whereby we can start to think about some of the things that we're saying and whether those things that we're saying are offensive to others. Now, I spend a bit of time on Twitter these days, blame my wife for that, but nevertheless, that's where I spend a lot of my time. And in doing so, I've come to realise that there are a lot of people who just don't give a crap about what other people think or feel, and that it's used as this avenue by which we can express whatever our thoughts are in whichever way we like, and we can do that without impunity. So we can do whatever we like, and it doesn't really matter, no matter who we offend. Now, I'm the first to confess that there are times when I've just got a little bit out of control on Twitter myself, and I've probably said some things to people who probably don't give a shit about what I've said anyway, and who probably won't be offended by what I said because there are probably heaps of other people who say similar offensive things to them. So, but I just want to analyse what it is that they're saying in what Andrew Bolt is saying, a useless, unimportant individual as he is. I'm happy to say that. In fact, I know that's not very woke, but I'm happy to say that about the man because he is a right-wing nut who believes that for whatever reason he has this media kind of empire behind him, Sky News, Murdoch Press, whatever, and he can express his thoughts in whichever way he likes. I have my little humble side show here talking about the things that I want to talk about, broadcast them to the world, but only having about 2 or 3 people watch them. Such is life. I don't care. So I just want to talk a little bit about the article he wrote and just sort of dissect it a little bit. He says here, so he's quoting George Orwell here, which is, I don't know whether he thinks that makes him seem intelligent or not, or whether he's even read Animal Farm, but he does quote it here, so, 10 out of 10 for at least being able to read, I guess. But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. So the notion here is that if you can change the language in certain areas, then you're going to corrupt the thought processes that go along with the change in that language. Now, in terms of Animal Farm and the pigs and their domination of others, I guess that's an appropriate quote from Orwell. But when we take out the word corrupt, it might read a little bit different. But if thoughts corrupt language, language can also corrupt thoughts. if thoughts change language and language changes thoughts, then perhaps we might have a different perspective of what Orwell was actually saying, because I believe that is true. If we change the language, then we change the way we're approaching people, we change the thought patterns that we have. So the best example of that, I guess, if we choose to be respectful to people and we find that they return that respect to us and we enjoy that experience, then I guess basically we're going to maybe modify our behaviour because it's bringing about a positive result for us. So changing the language, will change our thoughts about the way we're addressing individuals and may improve those relationships. And I certainly know in terms of the work I do around working with relationships and domestic violence in particular, yeah, that's what actually happens. We change our thoughts, we change our behaviour, and therefore we will be able to have better relationships. However, Bolt, I don't think necessarily agrees with that. He figures that he can say whatever he likes to whomever he likes, and it doesn't really matter because he's a Bolt. And he goes on to say here, while not as extreme, woke ideology enforced by the cultural left. So if you want to enforce respectful thinking, then you have to sit on the left of politics. So for some reason it becomes political. Also use language to manipulate and limit how people think and communicate. Instead of freedom of expression and impartial debate, we now live in a world where language has been corrupt to enforce mind control and groupthink. And that, folks, is the biggest load of bullshit I've ever read. That is not the truth. That I don't think that for a minute it restricts freedom. What it does do is makes us aware of the type of language that we're using and how that language is impacting other people. So I can call Andrew Bolt a dick, for example, and I don't think Andrew Bolt could care. But if I go and call a colleague or someone I work with a dick, I think they might be offended. If I call them hopeless, useless, helpless, stupid, and a whole host of other negative words, I'm pretty sure that they will be offended by what I have to say. If I criticise them for their gender or for their sexual orientation or for their behaviour in ways which is unhelpful, then they would object to that, I would have thought. I don't want to do that. I don't care about Andrew Bolt, so I'm happy to say he's a dick. But other people in my world, I'm prepared to change my language, make sure I have more appropriate language that is more helpful to them. This is not enforcing a cultural left. It's enforcing respectfulness. Now, this is a concept I don't think Andrew really understands, because there's nothing about any of the work that he does that I see as being respectful. And particularly the way he addresses people and talks about social issues and stuff, the man is totally disrespectful. So he needs to manifest. So a lot of this, I think, also is projection. I sent a post to somebody on Twitter just a little while ago, and my objection to what he was saying was that it just appeared to me that what he was criticising was really about him projecting his own fears and resentment through to somebody else. I think it was about Harry and Meghan, actually. So, and I think this is what Bolt's doing. So he's using this Stanford report as a way by which he can criticise the fact that it's coming firstly from a university where there's been lots of studies around this and where they're endeavouring to change the language. He also goes on to say, eliminate many forms of harmful language, including racist, violent and biased, e.g. disability bias, ethnic bias, ethnic slurs. Oh my God. No wonder Andrew's upset about all of this. Implicit bias, sexual bias. The guy details hundreds of words characterised as hate speech. And I think the reality is that, yes, a lot of those words are hate speech. He goes on to talk about, and we can't see it at the top here. I'll try and bring that down so we can. He talks about chairman, gentlemen, ladies, mankind and man-made have long been targeted as politically incorrect. Well, I do have to say that if we're talking about a person who's chairing a meeting and they happen to be a woman, then we wouldn't call them a chairman, would we? I mean, I know Andrew Bolt would, because he probably can't tell the difference between male and female anyway. But we wouldn't call them chairman. We'd call them chairwomen. So why not call them chairperson, so that we don't get confused? Gentlemen, I think we could abolish. I think that's an old-fashioned term. Ladies, I think, is an old-fashioned term that comes from the 19th century. Mankind, why don't we say humankind? Or made by others? And how difficult is it to change the language? See, one of the problems, I think, is that for years that we've adopted these a specific way of talking. Like, for example, in Australia we used to call women sheelers, right? I never hear that term now. Why don't I? Because it's a bygone era to start with, and secondly, no one really gives a shit about using that language. It's just gone. We don't call women sheelers unless your name happens to be Sheila. But so there's lots of terminology we've used over the years that just fades into the past. There's people like Andrew Bolt just don't want to let go, for some particular reason, of language which is now changing to become more suitable to the times. But people like Bolt want to stay wedged in the past. They want to stay being able to use the misogynistic, pathetic language that they've learned over the years, and they want to continue to do so. There's just a couple of other bits here. Where the Stanford Guide goes one step further is to cancel perfectly good words simply on the basis they are considered unfair and judgmental. Now, there's an argument. Let's not get rid of words that are unfair or judgmental. Let's abolish anything that is unfair or judgmental. Let's make everything, as much as we can, unfair. Let's be as judgmental as we can, because this is what Andrew Bolt would like us to be able to do, because that would fit with his persona and his definition of the world, to be unfair and judgmental, because that's who he is. And when we're talking about projection, then clearly that is what we're talking about when it comes to Bolt. So he also talks about, the Stanford Guide also warns against words that normalise violence against animals. I love this bit. So here he's saying, well, why are we considering the language we use to describe animals? And he uses these. Now, I've never heard of this before, so I don't think it's a big deal. I think actually what Andrew Bolt has done, he's just dragged this out of the woodwork somehow, and because it seems to make, it's a stupid thing to be talking about, I reckon, and it makes his argument, gives it some solidity because of the bizarreness of this sort of analysis. So he says here, the Stanford Guide also warns against words that normalise violence against animals, when arguing it is no longer acceptable to use the expression killing two birds with one stone and beating a dead horse. Well, firstly, I don't know anybody who uses those expressions anymore anyway. And as I said before, the expressions themselves seem to be dying out. And I'm just reading what he says here. All right, so we'll do it. So it brings in Marxism. So I'll bring it up and then highlight it, the bit I'm looking at. In addition, underlying woke language and control radical. So this is the bit that interests me. So in addition, underlying woke language, control and groupthink are radical neo-Marxist concepts like critical theory, identity politics, victimhood, and Louis Althusser's concept of the ideological state apparatus. Now, I haven't looked up Lewis, but I don't think Bolt has either, and he's extracted this from somewhere because it's not the sort of shit I guess he would be capable of even putting together. Underlying woke language, control, and groupthink. So he sees this as neo-Marxist concepts like critical theory. So this is where the right wing kind of lose it for me. I mean, they lose it in many areas, but particularly, I guess, in this area, because to sit on the right wing, you can't be critical in your thinking. You have to accept what the crazies are saying, such as Bolt, and you have to do it without any critical thinking whatsoever. So we can't adopt something like critical theory or critical race theory or anything that criticises the history that we have, the way we in Australia here have treated Indigenous people, the way in America have treated African American people and immigrants. We can't talk about any of that in a critical way because we can't. Well, the argument, I guess, is that we can no longer take responsibility for the things of the past, particularly things we personally didn't do. But I did a post on this not long ago where I talked about the fact that we could still feel ashamed of our history, and that for those people that we're still abusing in the same way as we did historically, we can certainly do what we can to rectify some of those problems, such as bridging the gap around Indigenous disadvantage, for example. So there's lots of things we can do, but he tries to make it. So he tries to add this he intellectualizes the issue, I think. The belief, so he goes on to say, underneath this bit, the belief is that Western capitalist societies like Australia are inherently and structurally oppressed of the other. Instead of being egalitarian and fair, all citizens are able to vote, where all are equal before the law and where equal opportunity prevails, the default position in society is awash with inequality and justice. Now, let's just analyse that before we go. The belief that Western capitalist societies, like Australia, are inherent and structurally oppressive of the other. So, in this case, he's seeing himself as the other. He sees the disadvantage that he's confronted with, that is, i.e., changing language, being respectful, that is a disadvantage, instead of being egalitarian and fair. So he doesn't see those changes as being egalitarian and fair, which is bizarre, because that's exactly what they are. They're changing the language, so we change the thought so that we treat people with respect and understanding. That is what it's all about. Where all citizens are able to vote. I don't know what in the fuck he's talking about. And perhaps you can help me. We're all equal before the law, and where equal opportunity prevails, the default position in society is awash with inequality and injustice. And that I do agree with. That it is. But it's got nothing to do with what he is talking about. It's more to do with the fact that we haven't changed the way we view those people in our society who are not as advantaged as others, those of a different colour skin, those that come from different racial groups, those that come from different ethnic groups, those that are in poverty, those that are homeless, those that have got mental health beings, those that have got domestic violence issues, those that have got drug and alcohol issues, those that have a different religious view than the mainstream. There's lots of people that are in our society where there's inequality and injustice. Children, as those of you that know me, are one of those that have a great deal of injustice, particularly under the purview of the child protection system. So, yeah, I agree. There's lots of inequity and injustice, which is the reason why we need to do away with language which implies injustice and unfairness. So, let me know what you think. Now, if you wish to email me, feel free to do so on, bring it back up, on this email address, which isn't coming up, so I have no reason to do that, but I can bring it up here. So on this, so contact me here. Let me know what you think, and you can also go to my my webpage, which is there, and let me know what you think there as well. This post will probably be up there at some particular point. And failing all of that, please subscribe, ring the bell, let us know, join me, help me by subscribing to my YouTube channel. And I'll be back again with something more to discuss and to debate with you. Take care, everybody. Look after yourselves and be safe.